When did you start dating?
When I started dating Mr. Wade, it was right around then.
April 2022?
22, yes. 2022. It was around then. I don't know, it's not like when you're in grade school and you send a little letter and it says, will you be my girlfriend, and you check it. I don't know the day that we started seeing each other, but it was early 22 is my recollection.
Okay, early 22. And you all went to Florida on vacation as well?
I don't recall going to Florida on vacation with him.
You never went to Florida with Mr. Wade?
When we went to get on the cruise ship, we went to Miami.
Okay, that's the only time that you went to Florida with him?
I think we went to Miami and spent the night. That's my recollection.
Okay.
I think we spent one night so that we wouldn't miss the ship. That's my recollection of our vacation.
Paid for that hotel?
In Miami?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that.
Okay. And how'd you get to Miami?
We would have flown. Okay. And we've done that, so that I'm clear. We've done that twice. I think one time we stayed, and I honestly can't tell you, did we stay when the ship left or did we stay when the ship came back? I also can't tell you, so there's 2 cruises out of Miami. There's one that's in that October time period that was with his mom, and then there was another that was a New Year's Eve trip. I know I paid for the New Year's Eve trip because the tickets were $697 each, and I thought this is ridiculous that the tickets are $700 to go to Miami, but when you travel during New Year's Eve, they get you.
Mark, what do you got?
Okay, so really emphatic, loud gestures we're getting on part of this. You're able to hear her hand suppress onto the table and make a noise. Now, sometimes she isn't that emphatic. There are times when she is that emphatic. I know I paid for the New Year's Eve trip. Okay, so I'm going to say you probably did pay for the New Year's Eve trip. Now, what about the other things? Wasn't so emphatic with those, but this seems to be very, very clear for her. Now, early 22 in my recollection, she says, and there's a single shoulder shrug, there's disdain and contempt, there's a big breath in and out as well. So there's a big cluster of behaviors that we haven't seen elsewhere around this idea of when I think the relationship started. And my guess is there's some contention around that. There must be an idea that if it started early on, then it plays better for the other side, I guess. So she seems a little bit unsure about that. Single shoulder shrug usually suggests there might be some uncertainty there. Disdain, contempt, is that for the questioning? Is that for the situation that she's in? I don't know. Big breath in and out. Again, it's like the brain needs a lot of oxygen around this one. Is this deception? I don't know whether it's deception, but it's certainly very different from the emphatic gestures we get on other parts. It could be a change in baseline in that she is unsure about why she's in this situation in the first place. She seems a little out of place here. I'm not saying she's a person that is not used to being in a court of law or the courts of law. My assumption is she is. I'm going to assume she isn't used to sitting there and having questions put towards her in this way. And I would say she is off balance on this one. Who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't be in this kind of situation? You came in to do what you're going to do, either for the law or for your team, or I don't know why she's doing what she's doing. But you probably didn't expect to be now in this position here. A little bit naive, maybe, but you didn't expect to be in this situation, and now you're not on a receiving end that you really wanted to be in. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I'm with you on a couple of things. Number one, let's talk about what I call request for approval. When a person holds their forehead up, it means nothing more than I need your approval. It doesn't mean that they're lying. It can mean that if it's in an appropriate time that you should look at it, but it's an indicator they're trying to get your buy-in. So it's her baseline. She does it all the time. If you watch her, her forehead's up as she's making her points and everything else. But there's a cluster. When you're asking when did she and this guy Wade first get together, she repeats the question to distance. She chaffs. It's not like grade school. When we say chaff, we mean she's spewing out details. She's being snarky in part with the questioner because she's not a fan, but she's also, that gives her time to think when she throws out things like that. And she does that single shoulder rise with a chin point to it. Scott, I know you're going to talk about this. I won't steal it, but uncertainty coupled with a break in eye contact and a move away isn't a good sign. We're talking about when this first started. And that's when she says early 22. And then she qualifies to the best of my recollection. I also see that pursing of her lips. This time I do believe is a pursing, and it's disapproval. Her respiration is up. It's not as high as it was in the last time, but it's there. Then she says in Miami. So she didn't remember she went to Florida until you get down to specifics. And then she remembers specifically how much she paid for plane tickets to go to Florida. So that's not believable, but she's not emphatic in those cases. Where she does start to get emphatic, Mark, I agree with you, is she does this. I'm not sure that her illustrators are hitting at the same point. You guys will have to help me there. But I do think that she has gone out of her way to avoid answering the question about when this thing started. If there's a place to be concerned, that would be it. The second part where she gets emphatic about spending the money seems realistic to me. Scott, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're seeing the truth and deception just peppered throughout this. I mean, I don't think it's half and half or anything, but I mean, it's a little bit of both. So when she says, when I started dating Mr. Wade, when she says there's a question, she repeats that question so she has time to think. Doesn't seem like it's a lot of time to think for us when you lay it out and go, oh, is that a third of a second or something? But it's enough time for your brain to start structuring things and thinking up an answer or a tack to take when you're giving an answer. If you've been asked something that you may have to be untruthful about, I got to be careful. So, and then when she says, it was right around then, she moves back in her chair a little bit. And usually when someone moves back in their chair, the way I see that is this. That means that could suggest a couple of things. It suggests they're not confident with their answer, or they may be being deceptive at this point. I always tell the story about when I deal with entrepreneurs. When I was at the Entrepreneur Center, I could tell you every time the financial person didn't know what they were talking about and got their information from somebody else, because when you'd ask them about the finances, when they would start, they'd back up a little bit. And when I would ask them later, how come you're not the one that knows? Why don't you know about this or that? Say, I just got here, I'm new, I'm whatever the story was. Where did you get it from? From so-and-so told me. Okay. So just from years of doing that, I really feel good about saying when someone backs up a little bit, usually that means they're not confident and or they're being deceptive at that point. And then she squints to feign that deeper thought about what's going on. After that, she says it was early 2022, and we see that single shoulder shrug, and that's when her chin goes to her shoulder. And I've told this story before as well, and I got it from Joe Navarro, where you hear when someone's being dishonest, quite often when someone, like you were saying, Mark, when the single shoulder goes up, we see that as a lack of confidence. But when you see that single shoulder go up and that chin go toward it, in my experience as well, it is almost to the T that person is being deceptive. So just from, there are no studies with that or anything, and I have to tell you that, from my point of view, that looks deceptive to me. We're seeing a lot of action in that brow, like you were talking about, Greg. A lot of the eyebrows being up and a lot going on. It gets close to being a grief muscle, but it's not a grief muscle. It arcs a little bit. Those little wrinkles arc a bit, but they don't come in as an upside down horseshoe, like we're used to seeing when we talk about the quote unquote grief muscle there. And if you can't remember when you went to Miami and if you stayed before you left or stayed when you got back, it sounds like she's doing cruises all the time. It sounds like she's going everywhere. If you can't remember the things that they're asking her about for your cruise, man, you're doing a lot of cruising. There's a lot going on there. You're traveling a whole lot. And especially if you're supposed to be busy doing whatever your normal, but she may be on vacation. Maybe she takes a month off or something. She does it all then. I have no earthly idea. But she's cruising around a lot. She can't remember dates like that. Then we see at the end, we see those disappearing lips or stress mouth. And that lets us know there's stress there as well. When someone's under a great degree of stress, we'll see the lips literally disappear. They'll almost suck them into their head. We call it compressed lips most of the time. We just see that like that, and they'll go away. So that lets us know there's a lot of stress there. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with y'all. And I just want you to process this, clarifying a question that any reasonable person would completely and fully understand. That's what we're seeing here. This is what's called a question repetition. When you see it in instances like this, where someone clearly understands the question and the subject matter of a question, this is a gigantic red flag. And then she's saying, not like when you're in grade school and we hand out a note, or I'm paraphrasing. She smiles about this. I think she thinks it's clever and intelligent, but explaining yourself like this in court is a very bad idea for anybody. And personally, this is my opinion, I would think a district attorney would be very keenly aware of something like this. Then she says, early 22 is my recollection. There's that single shrug that Scott, you were talking about. And the other behaviors here, this is a mountain of red flags. There's question repetition, qualifying the answers, hesitancy, single shrug, more hesitancy again at the mentioning of seeing each other. Just this alone is a score of 20 on the behavior table of elements, since people tend to like that. Where a score of 11 or more indicates a high likelihood of deception, this was a 20. She keeps repeating Miami when the question is about Florida. And if I'm doing the question here, if I'm the one doing the questioning, two giant things automatically come to mind. Either one, she's unsure if Miami is in Florida or not. And within this conversation, she's also unable to understand which continent countries are in. In this interview, we're not going to analyze that piece, but she didn't know which continent the stuff was in. So maybe that's the case. Or number two, she's locking down her speech to only mention Miami because something else in Florida is being concealed or hidden from me. So if I ask about Florida and I see a huge laser focus on Miami, I'm going to ask a question about anywhere else in Florida. Is there somewhere else in Florida? Maybe a question like that. So the second half of this clip was so full of stuff that it would take me an hour to go through it. So what I just covered just now was just the first 48 seconds of the clip. That's all I got.
I think when she's talking about that, it's like a thing when you're a little kid. I think she's trying to get that familiarity thing with her to make the attorney like her better. I think she's trying to connect with her for that brief second or something. I can't figure out why she would go down that road either.
I think it's the opposite.
I think she's trying to win over viewers.
Maybe so. Maybe that's it. That was so odd to hear.
I think there's a hell of a lot of sarcasm in that statement. I think she was being sarcastic and snarky.
Okay. Picking up on your sarcasm. Y'all remember that line from Tommy Boy?
Yeah. So, Greg, point of order. Why is this happening in Fulton County?
So, because it's where he apparently called and talked to the Fulton County guy. He talked to Raffensperger, I think is his name.
So it's under
it's their purview.
Potential crime has been is under their jurisdiction.
Yeah. And Fulton County is Atlanta. When people think of Atlanta, they think of the 6.5 million, 5 million, whatever the magic number is today, people that live in the metro. But Atlanta proper is probably 400,000 to 600,000, depending on what you read, people living in Fulton County / Atlanta.
Right.
That makes sense.
So it is accidental that she happens to be in charge of this.
I haven't done enough study on this whole thing to be able to answer that for you, Mark, but I know this is where they pointed to anomalies and where he called and said, can't you find X number of votes in this county? Right. I haven't spent enough time on the actual details of the trial, so I'm not going to go too deep, but realizing that is the core of the city of Atlanta. When we talk about the city of Atlanta, it is the city, and then everything else is just neighborhoods, subdivisions.
So it's not like the crime happened somewhere else and they decided, let's prosecute it in this state or this county. It's
about
the right
that,
geographical location. All right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and Georgia's a lot like New York in that there's this massive city and then lots of smaller little towns and then a lot of rural area. So 60% of the population probably lives in the Atlanta metro.
One of those tape replays.
And when did you start dating?
When I started dating Mr. Wade, it was right around then.
April 2022?
22, yes.
2022.
It was around then. I don't know, it's not like when you're in grade school and you send a little letter and it says, will you be my girlfriend, and you check it. I don't know the day that we started seeing each other, but it was early 22 is my recollection.
Okay, early 22. And you all went to Florida on vacation as well?
I don't recall going to Florida on vacation with him.
You never went to Florida with Mr. Wade?
When we went to get on the cruise ship, we went to Miami.
Okay, that's the only time that you went to Florida with him?
I think we went to Miami and spent the night. That's my recollection.
Okay.
I think we spent one night so that we wouldn't miss the ship. That's my recollection of our
Paid for that hotel?
In Miami? I don't remember that.
And how'd you get to Miami?
We would have flown. And we've done that, so that I'm clear, we've done that twice. I think one time we stayed, and I honestly can't tell you, did we stay when the ship left or did we stay when the ship came back? I also can't tell you, so there's 2 cruises out of Miami. There's one that's in that October time period that was with his mom. And then there was another that was a New Year's Eve trip. I know I paid for the New Year's Eve trip because the tickets were $697 each. And I thought this is ridiculous that the tickets are $700 to go to Miami. But when you travel during New Year's Eve, you know, they get you.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.